Welcome to the latest episode of the Pinnacle's NFL Insights. I'm your host, Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, alongside PFF's Ben Brown, to help guide you through the world of the NFL with week-to-week reflections and projections. Ben, I can't believe that we are already to week 6 of the NFL. What did you think of week 5?
I would definitely reiterate your point. I do think, every year we probably sit here and talk about how, the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season have gone as quickly as possible. This one feels like it has absolutely flown by. But I do think there is, a lot of I would say insight to be gleaned, especially through the first 5 weeks of the season, but specifically week 5, especially one team that I know that both of us kind of liked heading into the year, and maybe didn't start off exactly as well as we wanted them to, but definitely performed in week 5. The New York Jets. I think they are honestly kind of back here. Maybe they've never actually been and now are finally arriving. I'm not quite sure, but I thought the performance even against third string quarterback Skylar Thompson was really good. The main reason why I'm so bullish on them, Zach Wilson, I think finally looks the part as the second overall pick of the 2021 draft. I think the reason why he was actually drafted in that position was his ability to generate big plays downfield. He's definitely doing that from a clean pocket. So I am, kind of excited about where the New York Jets are headed. I do think that Robert Saleh, strong coaching tree coming up from the defense side of the football. I think he's kind of starting to put the pieces in place for what could be, another dominant defense in the NFL. Maybe not this year, but I think with young guys on both sides of the football contributing early, I think, maybe even if they don't get into the playoffs in 2022, they are going to definitely be a team on the rise here in 2023. And I do think that, week 5 definitely showcased that. I'm wondering, where do you stand on the New York football Jets right now? Jets.
Yeah, I mean, they had 4 draft picks in the first 36 picks. Breece Hall right now looks the part, 100 yards through the air, 97 on the ground. He scored a touchdown. In fact, the Jets scored 5 rushing touchdowns, include 2 by Michael Carter, 1 by the aforementioned Zach Wilson. Braxton Berrios took a reverse to the house as well. Wilson, one of my draft crushes in 2021. Right. You are finally seeing some things there. 10 yards an attempt, although a lot of that was the Breece Hall play the other day. Look, I think that, for the Jets, it's going to be hard because the AFC is a difficult place to win in, but it is encouraging that they're beating the teams that they should beat because, that's important. And they showed some resilience. Obviously, they get up 12-0 in that game. And 19-7 in the third quarter, that lead got whittled down to 2, and ultimately they blew it open in the fourth quarter with 3 touchdowns. I'm a big fan of how they closed that game. Just to kind of double down a little bit, the Dallas Cowboys, another team that had an injury at quarterback to start the season, but their defense is just doing so many great things. They win in Los Angeles against the Rams, 22-10. Micah Parsons looks absolutely the part of Lawrence Taylor. Dan Quinn, the former head coach of the Falcons, now the defensive coordinator, is dialing up. He is disguising coverages more than anybody in the league, stunts more than anybody in the league. They get the Eagles this week on Sunday Night Football. It's gonna be tough without Dak again. But even at 4-2, should they lose that game, they're in the driver's seat for a playoff spot in what is a pretty weak NFC. So I was hugely impressed with Dallas this week, and as well as the Jets. I do think the Jets having a winning record after 5 games it is an incredibly good thing for them to be in. Let's talk a little bit about the outright markets here, because we have seen obviously some changes to those. We've seen the Eagles, who in the preseason were basically 48-1 on Pinnacle, now 6-1, one of the favorites in the NFL. The Ravens, who you and I bet early in the offseason, started out 23-1, now they're 18-1, and our hometown Minnesota Vikings, Ben, opened 44-1, now 21-1. I think that one, by the way, let's talk about that for a little bit. I think that does reflect the complexity that's inherent in handicapping the Minnesota Vikings right now, a team that's 4-1, 1-4 against the closing number is one thing. But the other thing is obviously, a season ago when they basically every single game but 3 was a 1-score game. Right. This Vikings team is undefeated now in 1-score games this season. Ben, what do you think about the purple?
Yeah, I mean, it's really perplexing, I would say still through the first 5 weeks of the season, because we're not seeing some of like the end of game shenanigans that we were so used to seeing in 2021 with the Minnesota Vikings, right? I think, some of the end of half, end of game type situations, Kevin O'Connell has kind of alleviated a lot of the concerns in those particular moments. But in saying that, they are definitely still allowing teams to cling along in some of these games that they should definitely be burying them in. I think they were, essentially tied or down slightly against the Chicago Bears late in this particular matchup once again. So it's like kind of I would say still concerning how incapable they seem of actually putting teams away when they are clearly better. They do continue to kind of play down, but I still think, Justin Jefferson, probably the best non-quarterback in football, does seem like, Kevin O'Connell's at least, maximizing the output that Kirk Cousins is capable of. And I do think that, from that perspective, the rest of the NFC North specifically, I would say, is down worse than what we projected on even in the preseason. I do think that the Green Bay Packers, maybe they can kind of put things together, but they kind of look like a mess, I would say, both offensively and defensively to start the 2022 season. So I would not be surprised if the Minnesota Vikings, even though they're incapable of running away from teams in any given game, might actually kind of run away with this division when it's all said and done. So I'm kind of buying into them, and I do think that the price movement from them on Pinnacle is justified through the first 5 weeks of the season.
Yeah, it's weird, right? They get Skylar Thompson, the third string quarterback of the Miami Dolphins this week. Then they get a kind of a bad Cardinals team at home. Then they go to Washington in a Kirk Cousins revenge game to play the Commanders. Those are 3 winnable football games through the first, the next 3 weeks. And so, they could very well be 7-1. But to your point, and I think that this is why if you have a Kevin O'Connell ticket, you better hold on to it for Coach of the Year. Kirk Cousins, completion percentage is about the same as last year. Yards per attempt is down almost a full yard from 7.5 last year to 6.7. And if you look at his peak as a Viking in 2020 at 8.3, that's a yard and a half difference. You look at adjusted yards per attempt, that's 2.2 yards. But he does lead the league in game-winning drives. He does lead the league in fourth quarter comebacks with 3.
Right.
He's on pace for just 24 touchdowns, which would be a career low for him as a Minnesota Viking and a career low for him since he started being a starting quarterback in the NFL in 2015. So, it was a very tactical move by Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell to go with him, knowing that, this schedule, if it worked out this way, could be conducive to him not even playing as well as he's played in the past and still having a winning record there. I don't know if I would bet them as the favorite to win the NFC North. Right now, they're minus 138. It's the first time during the Matt LaFleur era that the Vikings have been favored during the middle of the season for the NFC North title. The Packers are plus 135. I don't know if I bet the Packers, but I also would not lay the money with the Vikings there. When I look at, sort of some of these other, outrights again, the Jaguars, we talked about them on the last show and how impressive they were. A couple losses in a row, one to an Eagles team that no one's going to fault them for, but a bad loss, a loss by 7 to a Houston team in which the Jags didn't score a touchdown and they missed 17 tackles on just Dameon Pierce alone. I think that was one where, they had a great point differential after, the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, but we got to slow our roll a little bit on the Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC South. I want to move on to this week, Ben, week 6. Okay. What I love about week 6, look, there are some privileges of games here, right? Washington goes to Chicago. That game's a pick 'em at Pinnacle. Both teams are minus 105. Showed, obviously reduced juice at Pinnacle, basically the sharpest and best lines there.
Right.
Don't really want to talk about that game. That game's not fun. But we do have some games between teams that I think are struggling that we thought were going to be good. And we also have, some games between some truly marquee teams. And the first one I want to talk about, the Cincinnati Bengals, my hometown Cincinnati Bengals, the town I live in now. They're going on the road to face New Orleans. Both teams are 2-3. The Bengals are minus 127 in this game. The Saints are plus 114. Total is 43.5, Ben. Man, I don't know what to make of this game. The Bengals defense is playing phenomenal football. the offense just can't seem to get it going. The Saints are one of those defenses that's just pesky. And if
Right.
the Bengals don't bring their best schemes and game plan into this game, it's not going to be pretty for them.
Right, definitely, and I think the injury situation for the New Orleans Saints specifically is also like really confusing in order to try and handicap this game accurately early on in the week. We got guys like Chris Olave, concussion. Sounds like he's at least in like a stage 3 area of his concussion protocol. Maybe he gets back. Michael Thomas, of course, as well, leg injury. Jarvis Landry, questionable leg injury. So like the Saints' top 3 receivers all very much questionable in this particular matchup. Again, and then you also have, of course, the Jameis Winston. Is he going to be back? It doesn't seem like he's likely either. So we're going to have Andy Dalton throw into guys like, Traquan Smith, some of these Deontay Harris types, everybody else that's kind of like, the worst of the worst with what they had last year. And I think that, at some point, we are going to see the Cincinnati Bengals break an explosive play. Obviously, what they relied on pretty heavily last year in order to have a lot of that offensive success hasn't really come to fruition yet this year. I think, there's probably a number of reasons for that, whether you want to blame, partially on the offensive line, partially on, bracket coverage on Jamar Chase, partially on, Joe Burrow just not alleviating pressure whatsoever, or it's the Zach Taylor and all the things that go into some of the things that he's putting forth from an offensive scheme or play calling perspective. But at some point, I think the talent is too big for Cincinnati's side in order for them to kind of keep stumbling and tripping over themselves every single week. So I think if you are playing one spot right now, given the questionable nature of so many people on the Saints, offense specifically, I think it's Cincinnati or bust. And I've been saying that every week, and it has not, worked out from my betting bankroll and portfolio so far in 2022. But I'm still buying in the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think this is a perfect spot for them to at least be ahead of the curve in a lot of situations. So at -1.5, road favorite. I'll take Cincinnati any day of the week, I would say.
Yeah, and if you look at the PFF grades, like Andy Dalton has graded really well the last 2 weeks, and coming back and almost beating the Vikings, covering the closing number there, and then obviously as 5-ish point favorites at home against Seattle. The Saints defense really let them down, but to Andy Dalton's credit, he played phenomenal football and scoring 38 points in that game, 39 points in that game to really, push that team over the top. So kudos to Dalton. Does it continue in this revenge game against his former mates in the Bengals? I don't know. I do want to talk about 2 teams that have at times been competitive in the NFC West, but right now are at various stages of difficulty, and that's the Arizona Cardinals going on the road to Seattle, laying 2.5. It's so weird, right? Because Arizona covers the number last week against Philadelphia, but it was a journey. Eagles were, got out to a 14-point lead. The Eagles, by the way, in a lot of games this year have gotten out to big leads and then just taking the foot off the gas. They did that against the Cardinals. It almost came back to bite them, but it didn't. Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray do not look, on point. But they go to Seattle, where the Seattle defense is not very good. However, Geno Smith is playing out of his mind. He's the top graded quarterback per PFF. He's throwing he's just a top guy in QBR. He's throwing the ball around the yard. The wide receivers for Seattle are great. They did lose Rashad Penny, but Ken Walker is there, for reinforcements. When I look at this, and I know, what the PFF numbers say, I looked at it earlier today. It's got to be one that I kind of disagree with, though. I like Seattle getting 2.5 points plus 122 on the money line at home against an Arizona Cardinals team that, Ben, I just don't think is inspired enough to win this football game.
Yeah, definitely. And I honestly, I have to agree with you, right? I do think that, Geno Smith, like you said, top graded passer from PFF's grading so far this year. First guy to get a positive 2.0 play on any one particular play from a passing perspective in 2022, and has been dropping, absolute dimes to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. We have them as, the top, one of the top graded offensive units overall through the first 5 weeks this season, and it's a lot to do with Geno Smith. I think he kind of flashed at points at stretches last year, kind of filling in for Russell Wilson. And there was, I think that there's a very good reason for why Pete Carroll should definitely feel, vindicated in his decision to actually go with Geno Smith, as the quarterback and kind of move on from Russell Wilson, because it's playing out, way better than anybody would have expected. And I think that you, in some ways, kind of got to ride the hot hand there, right? I mean, if you think Seattle, has the biggest home field advantage of any other team in the NFL, then 2.5 is, completely probably wrong, I would say, in this particular matchup. I do think, Arizona, like you said, maybe showed some signs of, putting things in place last year, but that was it wasn't necessarily like a backdoor cover because they were tied at the end, and Philadelphia ended up kicking that field goal to win it. But it still was not, I would say, a very impressive cover performance from Arizona. I think it was aided somewhat by some injuries along, the Eagles' offensive line as well. So I'm concerned. I think, I would be surprised if, the Cardinals are probably going to have to put up, I would say, 30 to 35 points in order to potentially win this game. And I just don't know if I trust Cliff Kingsbury enough in order to actually do that. So I'm with you. I like Seattle plus 2.5. I know, like you said, defensively, they've been really poor. Tariq Woolen's basically been like the one guy, 3 interceptions in the past 3 games, grading pretty well from a PFF perspective. Rookie cornerback, definitely arriving ahead of schedule, but outside of him, I think, this is a really bad defense, maybe the second worst unit in the NFL. So if the Cardinals, can't put it together, I think it might finally be time to, probably not necessarily be backing them for the rest of the season if they can't really do something here in Seattle. But I would be surprised if they do. So I think, Seattle plus 2.5. Doesn't look like it's going to get up to plus 3, but if it does, I think that would be a pretty decent hammer spot. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk about 2 more games with 4 teams that we haven't mentioned yet. This is the game between the 2 best teams in the NFL, the Buffalo Bills. They go to Kansas City. They are 3-point favorites on Pinnacle, although it's more like a true plus 2.5. Buffalo's -3 is plus 106. So you look at the money line, Buffalo's -143, Kansas City plus 128. Patrick Mahomes, get this, Ben, as an underdog. He's been an underdog 8 times in his career. Against the number, he's 7-0-1. And straight up, he's 6-2. Now it's a little bit misleading because Patrick Mahomes' first 3 starts on the road against Denver in week 17 of 17, he was an underdog and won. Week 1 against the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles, he was a 3.5-point dog, won outright. And then against Pittsburgh, I believe, in week 2 of 2018, he was also roughly a field goal, I think it was more like a 6-point underdog in that game, and they went outright. Since then, it's been a game against New England in 2019. It's been a game against, I believe it was Baltimore in 2020. We just had one where he was an underdog against Tampa Bay. So we've had games where he's been an underdog, right? And he's almost always delivered a win or a cover. This one feels a little bit different though, Ben, because Buffalo, leading the league in scoring, leading the league in points, or second in scoring, and leading the league in points allowed. Like this is, Buffalo is a great football team. And, Kansas City, we watched them on Monday night in Omaha when I was here to visit. Kansas City can be best described as a team with a fantastic quarterback.
Right.
The coach, when he coaches right, is amazing. And a roster that is good enough to win the Super Bowl, but not nearly as good as Buffalo. So what do you think about this game?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And I think, heading into the season, probably even heading into, like week 2, week 3, Buffalo had by far the most complete roster in the NFL. I don't think there was any question of that. And the one trump card that Kansas City kind of has is Patrick Mahomes being, not only the best quarterback in the NFL, but, so much further ahead of everybody else that he maybe doesn't need the high quality players at every single position in order to kind of compete with some of these teams that, have, guys 2 through 53 are a lot better than what he's, working with. But I think the injury situation for Buffalo is a little bit concerning. They've definitely shown some cracks when Jordan Poyer hasn't been in the lineup. No Micah Hyde either. Obviously, Tre'Davious White isn't going to be back for this particular matchup either. So I think that given the current state of the Bills secondary, it's definitely, a situation that Patrick Mahomes can exploit given the right time. And I do think that the Chiefs offensive line has been good enough from a pass blocking perspective to the point where they can circumvent what has been a really good, if not the best, front four for the Buffalo Bills so far here in 2022. I think they have like the highest pressure rate or the second highest pressure rate in the NFL. But I think the Chiefs offensive line matches up fairly well with them. And I do think that, the Bills, difficult spots on their offensive side, I do think that, the Chiefs have at least playmakers at those positions that can potentially exploit some of those matchups. So if I'm getting, what I consider the best quarterback on the planet at a plus price at home, I think I'm locking it in every single time. And I do think, some of the matchups I think are going to be, exploited from the Chiefs' perspective a lot better than what the Bills are going to be able to take advantage of. And I think that, with Patrick Mahomes in the fold as well, they are definitely my side and my preferred side in this handicap.
Yeah, Trent McDuffie back. You got a lot of folks back on that defensive side of the ball coming back. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, along
always
with
back. He's never left. I mean, right?
Combined for more yards than the departed Tyreek Hill. And that's very clearly what the Chiefs wanted out of those guys, and what they've been able to get. Okay, lastly, Denver going on the road against Los Angeles in an AFC West battle between two teams that are chasing Kansas City. This game opened 6. It was a game that I like Denver. They're coming off of the rest there. Not only you get the Thursday night rest, but you get the Monday night rest against a Chargers team that basically needed some luck, and we finally got luck from the Chargers with Cade York missing that field goal for the Cleveland Browns. So they're 3-2. Denver's 2-3. Obviously, as a Kansas City fan, I'd love to see both of them be 3-3 after this game. What do you think of this game, Ben?
Yeah, definitely. I like Denver, plus 5.5. You can get it definitely. But my concern, I would say maybe before locking in that bet, is I'd really like to know the status of, 1A Randy Gregory, 1B Baron Browning, right? 2 of the best 5 players from a pressure rate so far in 2022, both very much questionable in this particular matchup. I do think that if the injury situation kind of swings in the Chargers' direction, if they are kind of capable of getting, Keenan Allen back in the fold, and some of the Denver Broncos injury situations break poorly for them, I can definitely see why, the Chargers could run away with this one, especially given, the current state of the Broncos offense. But I do think at some point, Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson are going to kind of be able to put some sort of semblance of productive offense together. Not necessarily saying it's going to happen here against the Chargers, but they haven't really been all that great defensively. And I do think the Broncos, do bring that facet of play into this game in a much better environment than what the Chargers have right now. So I would take Broncos +5, +5.5. Basically, I should look at where exactly is it on Pinnacle. Is it down to 4.5 now?
It's 5.5. Yeah, juiced towards Denver, it looks like. But I absolutely agree with you. I think this is the classic. You doubt a team. They look terrible. And the Chargers, you're like, oh, the Chargers are back. We're finally getting something expected out of them, and they can't handle expectations. I like that. Okay, speaking of expectations, okay. Our expectations for college football have been kind of upturned this season, right? We have, going into the year, Alabama was a favorite. Georgia was there along with them. Ohio State was third. I didn't really see it in the Buckeyes, but the markets have disagreed. The undefeated Ohio State Buckeyes are +180 to win the college football championship right now. Georgia and Alabama are trailing at +220 each. Actually, Alabama's now +240. Clemson at 12-1, even with DJ Uiagalelei playing okay, but not necessarily obviously being that caliber of quarterback that you're seeing, at least with Ohio State and Alabama, with Bryce Young hurt, albeit. Ben, what do you think about this market, and is there any value here with 3 teams basically as 2-1 or so, and the rest of the teams long shots and probably with no chance to win the college football playoff?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to buy into anybody else as far as those top 3 teams in order to even kind of get there. I think maybe there would be a case to be made for Clemson, but it's kind of Clemson or Michigan fitting into that final spot. I would consider Clemson probably being the better team in a straight up environment against Michigan, so maybe they have an opportunity. But yeah, I think it's I would probably lean in Ohio State's direction more than anything else, especially given the injury situation to Bryce Young this week. Obviously, big match against Tennessee. If he's able to go, will greatly impact and benefit their outlook. But if he's not, this is a game that if they let slip away, they're very much questionable as far as if they're going to be one of those 4 teams, especially if they don't end up winning, the conference championship when it's all said and done. So I think I'm probably most nervous about Alabama. I do think Ohio State, makes the most sense right now if you're going to buy into any one of those 3 teams. But I don't know if I can really make a strong case for anyone at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about a couple before we go. 2 college football games. Okay, I'm gonna start with one. Okay. Our Minnesota Golden Gophers, our hometown team, they go on the road to face Illinois. Illinois 6.5-point underdogs. Given the history, given how much of a house Illinois has been so far this year, Brett Bielema doing a lot of great things. They win a game, an ugly game against Iowa. I'm going to take the Illinois Fighting Illini plus 6.5 against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. This just feels like a meltdown game. In fact, I think the money line is probably a good play as well at plus 207 on Pinnacle. I like the Illinois Fighting Illini.
Yep. I definitely don't. I don't hate it whatsoever either. I kind of lost faith in our Golden Gophers a couple weeks ago. So I can definitely get on board with that. I will say my favorite, probably, college football bet coming up here, week 7. I do like Eastern Michigan minus 2.5. I also like them, on the money line going up against Northern Illinois team that I think is maybe a little bit overrated, but anytime I can back, our Eastern Michigan, units, I can definitely do that. So I kind of like them a little bit. I would say slightly better quarterback. We have them, much better offensively, a little bit better defensively as well. I think that match up pretty well against Northern Illinois. And I think that, given what both these teams have shown so far, Eastern Michigan at, less than a field goal differential is a kind of a slam dunk play, in my opinion, for week 7.
Yeah, going back to the well there after they won last week outright as big underdogs for us. Eastern Michigan, a very good side, I think, is this week as well. So that was the NFL Insights podcast for another week. At Pinnacle Podcast on all platforms to follow and keep up to date on all Pinnacle's latest shows, including the brand new NBA Breakdown episode ahead of the new season with the Athletics, Joe Varden and Seth Partnow. Please keep across Pinnacle.com page for the latest betting insights, including Mark Taylor's Game of the Week, Pinnacle's weekly NFL prediction article, and NCAA college football predictions. So for Ben Brown at PFF Ben Brown on Twitter, this has been Eric Eager at Eric Eager _ on Twitter, at Pinnacle on Twitter and Pinnacle Sports on YouTube. This has been the Pinnacle NFL Insights podcast. Please gamble responsibly. Thank you.